She was the woman no king dared to truly claim, until he realized that power meant nothing without her. In a kingdom ruled by tradition and secrecy, only one choice could defy fate, rewrite the rules, and ignite a love that would shake the crown itself. Would the Alpha King surrender his throne, or his heart? The first time she refused him, the room did not react. No gasp, no whispers, just a brief, collective pause, as though the air itself had forgotten how to move. The Alpha King stood at the head of the long obsidian table, hands braced against its polished surface. His presence so commanding it usually bent silence into obedience. Men twice her age had bowed without being asked. Women with fortunes and pedigrees had angled their bodies toward him instinctively, like iron filings to a blade. Power followed him everywhere, quiet and unquestioned. But she did not bow. She stood near the windows, where dusk pressed its bruised violet face against the glass, her posture relaxed, her hands loosely clasped before her as if this were any other conversation, any other man. Her name rested unspoken on his tongue, heavier than it should have been. "Say it again," he said at last, voice low, controlled. She met his gaze without flinching. Her eyes were steady, dark with something unreadable. Not defiance, not fear, something calmer, more dangerous. "No," she repeated. Single word. Clean. Unembellished. Final. Around them, advisors shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. Another pretended to review notes that had already been memorized. The Alpha King straightened slowly, every movement precise, deliberate. He had been trained from youth never to react first. Reaction was weakness. Control was survival. "You understand what is being offered," he said. It was not a question. "I do. The position beside me grants protection, influence, security beyond imagination." "I know." "Then explain your refusal." She inhaled, not deeply, not nervously. Just enough to ground herself. "Because I don't want to belong to power," she said. "I want to belong to myself." The words did not echo. They settled. Heavy. Inconvenient. He studied her as if she were a puzzle that had just shifted shape. She had been vetted, observed, approved. Intelligent. Capable. Loyal in her own way. She had navigated court politics with a grace that suggested instinct rather than ambition. Everyone had assumed the outcome was inevitable. Everyone but her. "You would walk away from everything," he said slowly. "From comfort. From legacy." "I would walk away from a cage," she replied gently, "even if it were made of gold." Something flickered across his expression then. Too fast for anyone else to catch. Not anger. Not insult. Recognition. The meeting ended shortly after, dismissed under the guise of logistics and future discussion, but the decision had already fractured the room. As people filtered out, heads bent together in low murmurs, he remained standing, eyes fixed on the place she had occupied. She did not look back at him as she left. That night, the palace felt larger than usual. Corridors stretched. Footsteps echoed. The Alpha King stood alone on the balcony outside his private chambers. The city sprawled beneath him in constellations of light and movement. This was his domain. His responsibility. His burden. He had never wanted companionship for comfort. Partnership, yes. Stability. An equal presence to reinforce the structure he had built with blood and calculation. She had been the perfect fit on paper. He found himself recalling the way she had said no. Without trembling. Without apology. As though refusal were not rebellion but truth. In his experience, people said no only when they believed they had leverage. She had none. And yet she had stood firm, unprotected, unarmed, unafraid. It unsettled him more than any threat ever had. Across the city, she removed the pins from her hair and let it fall freely around her shoulders. Her rooms were modest by palace standards, chosen deliberately. Fewer eyes, less expectation. She leaned her forehead briefly against the cool stone of the window, allowing herself a single exhale. She had known the cost of refusal before she spoke. Influence lost, safety thinned, doors quietly closed. But she had also known the cost of acceptance, and that price was one she had paid before, long ago, in smaller ways that had taught her never to surrender herself again. She did not hate him. That surprised her most of all. He was not cruel, not careless. Power had shaped him, not corrupted him. That made him far more dangerous. Men like him did not need to coerce. The world bent willingly. She changed into simple clothes and sat on the edge of her bed, hands resting in her lap, pulse steady. Tomorrow would be different, sharper, smiles thinner. She would navigate it as she always had. What she did not anticipate was the way his attention would follow her like a shadow. In the days that followed, she felt it before she saw it. Conversations paused when she entered rooms. Invitations shifted. Guards lingered longer than necessary. And always, somewhere at the edge of her awareness, the Alpha King observed. Not openly, not possessively, curiously. He began to ask questions about her past, framed as administrative interest. He reassigned duties that placed her within his line of sight more often. He noticed things he had never bothered to notice before. The way she listened more than she spoke, the way she diffused conflict without raising her voice, the way people gravitated toward her without realizing why. She noticed his restraint, how he never summoned her without cause, never pressed the issue again. That, more than pressure, kept her unsettled. Power, when denied, usually retaliated. One evening, as she crossed the inner courtyard, he spoke her name for the first time without an audience. The sound of it stopped her mid-step. "Yes," she said, turning. The torches caught his face in warm shadow, softening edges that had been carved sharp by responsibility. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You were right," he said finally. She lifted a brow, surprised. "About. A crown can be a cage." The admission hung between them, fragile and rare. She searched his expression for calculation and found none. Only honesty, stripped bare and briefly unguarded. "I didn't refuse you to teach you a lesson," she said quietly. "I know." "Then let this stand." He nodded once. "For now." As she walked away, her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the uneasy awareness that something irreversible had begun. Not a romance. Not a rebellion. Reckoning. Behind her, the Alpha King watched the woman who had refused his crown disappear into the dark, and for the first time in his reign, he understood that power could be challenged not by force, but by choice. And he was no longer certain which frightened him more. The court adjusted to her refusal the way it adjusted to everything uncomfortable, quietly, strategically, and with thin smiles that hid sharper thoughts. No one confronted her directly. That would have required courage. Instead, doors that once opened without pause now hesitated. Invitations arrived later. Conversations ended sooner. The world had learned she was not to be relied upon in the expected ways. She accepted the shift without complaint. Each morning, she moved through the palace with the same composed grace, her head held level, her steps unhurried. She did her work thoroughly, spoke only when necessary, and never once attempted to justify herself. That, more than her refusal, unsettled them. Regret would have made her manageable. Silence made her dangerous. From the upper gallery the Alpha King watched. He had told himself his interest was logistical. A ruler needed to understand disruption. She was an anomaly in an otherwise predictable system. Studying her was not personal. It was prudent. And yet, as days passed, he found his attention drawn to details that offered no political value. The way she paused before answering, as if weighing truth against convenience. The way she noticed the smallest shifts in a room, who held tension, who carried resentment, who listened. The way people leaned toward her without realizing they were doing it. She did not perform loyalty. She embodied it. That, perhaps, was why her refusal had struck so deeply. Loyalty, freely given, was rarer than obedience, and far more difficult to command. He altered schedules without explanation, ensuring their paths crossed naturally. He assigned her to oversee matters that brought her into proximity. Not to him, he told himself, but to decision-making, to influence, to exposure. If she would not accept the crown, she would at least understand its weight. She noticed, of course. She noticed how her responsibilities shifted subtly, how messages now passed through her hands before reaching higher authority. She noticed the careful neutrality of his gaze when others were present, and the sharp attentiveness when they were not. He was studying her just as she was studying him. It was not the scrutiny that unsettled her. It was the restraint. Power rarely resisted the urge to press. His did. One afternoon, a dispute erupted between two senior advisors, an argument over resource allocation that escalated into accusation. Voices rose. Tempers flared. The Alpha King listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When neither man could bring himself to concede, his gaze shifted to her. "Your assessment," he said. The room stilled. She hesitated only a fraction of a second before speaking. Her response was measured, incisive, and devastatingly fair. She acknowledged merit on both sides, exposed inefficiencies neither had addressed, and proposed a compromise that preserved authority without sacrificing outcome. When she finished, silence followed, not the stunned kind but the thoughtful kind. "Implement it," the Alpha King said. Neither advisor objected. Afterward, as the room emptied, she gathered her notes with steady hands. She did not look at him, though she felt his attention settle on her like a question he had not yet learned how to ask. "You could have taken advantage," he said quietly. He paused. "Of what?" "Of the moment. Of my reliance." She met his gaze then. "I didn't earn my position by exploiting uncertainty. And yet you refuse security." "I refuse ownership," she corrected. "There's a difference." He considered that long after she left. That evening, an unexpected invitation arrived at her door. Not a summons. An invitation. Dinner. Private. Optional. She stared at the seal for a long moment before setting it aside. She did not go. The message was received. The following days brought no retaliation. No withdrawal. If anything, his respect sharpened. He no longer tested her with proximity. Instead, he tested himself with distance. He began to ask not how to bend her will, but why he wanted to. She, in turn, found herself noticing the man beneath the title. How exhaustion sometimes etched itself into his posture when no one was watching. How he lingered over decisions that affected lives rather than optics. How, in rare unguarded moments, his expression softened with something like longing, for what she did not know. One night, she remained late to finalize reports. The halls were quiet, the palace wrapped in that particular stillness that came only after power slept. She was nearly finished when footsteps approached. He stopped at the threshold, hands clasped behind his back. "You work too much," he said. "So do you." A corner of his mouth lifted. "I'm paid to." She set down her pen. "So am I." Silence settled between them, not strained but unfamiliar. He studied the ink-stained edge of her fingers, the loosened tie of her hair, the absence of any ornament meant to impress. "You don't use what you're given," he said. "I use what I need. And if what you need is protection," he stood, "then I'll ask for it." He searched her face, perhaps for pride, perhaps for vulnerability. He found neither. Only certainty. "That's dangerous," he said. "So is power that demands gratitude." He exhaled slowly. "You don't fear consequences. I respect them." He nodded once, as if conceding a point he had not intended to yield. When he left, she sat back down, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. She had not expected honesty from him. She had not expected restraint from herself. And yet both had been there, undeniable. Across the city, whispers began to circulate, not of scandal, but of imbalance. A woman who would not be claimed. A king who would not command. The narrative did not fit, and so it unsettled. She felt it building, the pressure of expectation bending toward inevitability. Something would have to give. Either she would step forward or he would step back. Neither seemed inclined to move. As she extinguished the lamps and prepared to leave, she understood with sudden clarity that her refusal had not ended the story. It had begun it. And somewhere in the palace, the Alpha King stood alone at a window, watching the lights dim one by one, realizing that for the first time in his life, he wanted something he could not take, only be chosen for. The first confrontation did not arrive with raised voices or locked doors. It arrived quietly, wrapped in civility, disguised as necessity. She was reviewing correspondence in the Eastern Council chamber when the Alpha King entered unannounced. No entourage, no herald, just the measured cadence of his footsteps against stone. She did not rise. That he noticed immediately. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "You don't need permission," she replied without looking up. He sat anyway. For a moment neither spoke. Sunlight spilled through the high windows, catching dust in the air, turning the space almost gentle. He studied her face in profile, the calm set of her mouth, the slight furrow between her brows that appeared when she concentrated. She felt his gaze like pressure, familiar now, but no less deliberate. "You've been redirecting requests," he said at last. "Correct. Without consulting me. I was authorized to. Authorization is not autonomy." She set her papers aside and finally met his eyes. Then perhaps authority should stop pretending it values initiative. The words landed cleanly. No venom. No softness. "I didn't say I disapproved," he said. "You implied it." A pause stretched between them, taut as wire. He leaned back slightly, studying her not as a ruler, but as a man recalibrating his footing. "You assume intent where there was curiosity. And you assume obedience where there is none," she countered. A flicker of something like amusement crossed his face. "You enjoy this." "I enjoy clarity." "Then be clear," he said. "What do you want?" The question was deceptively simple. She considered it carefully before answering. "I want my work to matter without my presence being negotiated like currency." He nodded slowly. "And you believe proximity to me diminishes that?" "I believe proximity to unchecked power always carries a cost." Silence followed. Not the brittle kind. The kind that followed truth spoken aloud. "You think I would consume you," he said quietly. "I think you don't notice when you do," she replied. That struck closer than he expected. His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with restraint. He had been accused of many things in his reign: ruthlessness, calculation, emotional distance, but never carelessness. "I have never forced loyalty," he said. "No," she agreed. "You've simply made it expensive to refuse." The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, footsteps echoed faintly, reminders of a world that still moved, still functioned under his rule. Inside, something unspoken shifted, fragile and irreversible. "You mistake my caution for indifference," he said. "I mistake nothing," she replied. "I observe." He stood, closing the distance between them with unhurried intent. She did not retreat. That, more than anything, unsettled him. "Then observe this," he said. "I am not interested in owning you." "Ownership isn't always declared," she said. "Sometimes it's implied." Sometimes it's wrapped in protection and expectation. He searched her face, as if trying to locate the source of her certainty. Who taught you this? She hesitated, just long enough to signal that the answer mattered. Experience, she said finally. He stepped back, the tension easing just enough to allow air between them. You're wrong about one thing. Only one. A corner of his mouth lifted. I notice when things change. Her pulse quickened, traitorous and unwelcome. Then notice this, she said softly. I will not be shaped by your attention. He inclined his head, acknowledging the boundary. Noted. When he left, she exhaled slowly, aware that the exchange had altered something fundamental. They had crossed a threshold, not into intimacy, but into honesty. That was far more dangerous. The consequences arrived sooner than she expected. At the next assembly, a prominent ally of the Alpha King openly challenged her authority, questioning her judgment, her loyalty, her understanding of hierarchy. The room tensed, waiting for her to falter, for him to intervene. He did not. She met the challenge head-on, dismantling the argument with precision and composure. When she finished, silence followed, then reluctant nods. The ally sat back, chastened. Only then did the Alpha King speak. She speaks with my authority, he said. Question it again, and you question me. The declaration rippled through the room. She felt it like heat along her spine. Afterward, she confronted him in the corridor, her voice low but fierce. You didn't warn me. You didn't need protection, he replied. You needed space to prove yourself. You made me a target. You already were one. She stopped walking. He turned to face her. You can't shield me selectively, she said. Either you trust me or you don't. I do, he said without hesitation. Then stop standing behind me. He considered her for a long moment. And if I stand beside you? That depends, she said. Are you standing as a king or as a man? The question lingered long after she walked away. Others began to notice. Not the obvious things. The subtle ones. How the Alpha King's attention followed her in rooms crowded with ambition. How his tone softened when addressing her, sharpened when others overstepped. How he listened, truly listened when she spoke. And how another man began to watch her too. He was everything the court understood. Charming, ambitious, well-positioned. He offered admiration openly, without complication. His interest was obvious, his intentions clear. She did not encourage him. But she did not discourage him either. The Alpha King noticed immediately. The realization surprised him. Not the jealousy, but the intensity of it. He had no claim. He had made no request. And yet the thought of her choosing someone else settled in his chest like a weight he could not dislodge. Desire, he realized, was not possession. It was vulnerability. That night, he stood alone in his chambers, staring at the city he commanded, understanding for the first time that power did not grant immunity from longing. Across the palace, she removed her cloak and leaned against the door, eyes closed, heart unsteady. She had drawn lines with care, defended them with reason. And still something had crossed. Not his touch. Not his words. His restraint. She knew then that whatever lay ahead would not be simple. That choice, once awakened, could not be put back to sleep. And somewhere between authority and desire, both of them stood on ground that no map had ever marked. The first time she truly understood the cost, it was not delivered as a threat. It arrived disguised as an invitation. The Alpha King requested her presence at a private council session held after dusk, when the palace quieted and the corridors echoed with fewer ambitions. Only 5 others attended, men and women whose names carried weight older than the stones beneath their feet. She recognized the subtle shift the moment she entered. Conversations paused. Eyes tracked her movement. She was not supposed to be there. She took her seat anyway. The discussion began civilly enough. Trade disputes, border enforcement, the allocation of resources, but it soon veered into territory sharp with implication. A proposal surfaced, thinly veiled, that would consolidate power among a select circle of families. Her voice cut through the suggestion with measured clarity. That would destabilize the lower districts, she said, and weaken loyalty in the long term. One of the elders smiled thinly. Your concern is admirable, but perhaps short-sighted. The Alpha King watched her closely as she replied. Short-sighted policies are often called tradition when they benefit the few. Silence followed. Not approval. Not rejection. Assessment. Afterward, as the others filtered out, he remained seated, fingers steepled, gaze unreadable. You made enemies tonight, he said. I already had them. Yes, he replied. But now they know your name. She met his eyes steadily. That was inevitable. He exhaled slowly, a sound closer to weariness than frustration. You don't have to carry this weight. I chose to, she said. Just as you did. That stopped him. He rose, closing the distance between them, but not crossing the invisible boundary she had drawn. You think this is choice, he said quietly. But choice here is an illusion. Everything has consequences. So does silence. He studied her, and for the first time she saw uncertainty flicker beneath his composure. You see too much, he said. And you hide too little, she replied. That night, she lay awake, replaying the expressions around the table, the way her words had shifted the room. She had stepped into something vast and unforgiving. Standing beside him meant exposure, influence, risk. It meant being seen. The following days confirmed it. Whispers followed her through the halls. Invitations arrived, laden with expectation. Allies sought alignment. Rivals tested her resolve. She felt the court's gravity pulling, attempting to shape her into something useful. And through it all, the Alpha King remained. Present, attentive, restrained. They spoke often now, in brief exchanges that carried more meaning than length allowed. A glance during assemblies. Quiet word in passing. The tension between them sharpened, not with desire alone, but with unspoken understanding. One evening, she found him in the library, standing before a shelf of old treaties. He did not turn when she entered. You were right, he said. About the cost, he replied. They expect you to bend. She joined him, scanning the titles. They always do. I could end it, he said. With a word. And replace it with what? She asked. Obedience. He faced her then. Safety. She shook her head. That isn't safety. That's erasure. A long pause followed. Then he nodded once. You would not survive quietly. No, she agreed. I would disappear. His gaze softened, something unguarded breaking through. I won't let that happen. She held his eyes. You can't protect me from consequence. No, he said. But I can stand with you in it. The words settled between them, heavy and dangerous. Later that night, she attended a gathering she had not been invited to. Another test. The room buzzed with false warmth. She navigated it with practiced ease until a voice cut through the noise. You must find it exhausting, the woman said sweetly, to pretend you belong here. She smiled calmly. Exhaustion comes from pretending. I don't. Laughter rippled, sharp and brief. The woman flushed, retreating. Across the room, the Alpha King watched, pride flickering in his eyes before he masked it. She felt the weight of his attention, steady and grounding. When the gathering ended, he caught up with her in the corridor. You handled that well, he said. I'm learning. From whom? She considered him. From watching what power does and what it doesn't. He smiled faintly. Careful. You're becoming indispensable. She stopped walking. That's what worries me. He frowned. Why? Because indispensability is just another form of captivity. Understanding dawned slowly across his face. I would never cage you, he said. I know, she replied. But others would. And they would use you to do it. He reached out, stopping himself before contact. Then what do you want from me? She met his gaze, heart steady. Truth. And the space to walk away if I choose. He nodded, solemn. You have both. As they parted, she felt the pull stronger than ever. Not toward the crown, but toward the man who wore it with such visible weight. Standing beside a king meant sharing his shadows. And she was no longer sure she could step back into the light alone. If this story has begun to pull you in, stay close. Some truths only surface when the cost becomes unavoidable. The shift was subtle at first. An adjustment in tone, a recalibration of attention, but Florence felt it immediately. The court no longer watched her with curiosity alone. Now there was expectation layered into every glance, calculation in every smile. She had crossed from novelty into inevitability. They assumed she would give in. The realization settled uneasily in her chest as she walked the long corridor toward the council wing. Her footsteps echoing softly against marble. Servants bowed a fraction deeper than before. Guards straightened when she passed. Doors opened faster. None of it was earned through title. All of it came from proximity. From him. That afternoon's session confirmed it. A proposal was raised. Innocent on its surface, insidious beneath. A restructuring of advisory roles, placing her position firmly under royal oversight. Framed as efficiency. Presented as honor. She listened in silence, fingers folded neatly in her lap. When the floor opened for response, the Alpha King did not speak. He looked at her. The choice was deliberate. Public. Dangerous. Florence rose slowly. I decline. A ripple moved through the chamber. Decline. One counselor repeated. This is not a personal invitation. No, she agreed calmly. It's a leash. Murmurs followed, sharper now. She continued before anyone could interrupt. My effectiveness comes from independence. If that threatens the structure, then the structure should be questioned. Not me. She sat. The Alpha King's gaze lingered on her a beat longer than necessary before he addressed the room. The matter is closed. Afterward, he found her on the terrace overlooking the city. Wind tugged at her cloak as she stared out over the rooftops, the lives moving below, unaware of how easily they were rearranged by unseen hands. You could have handled that differently, he said. I could have handled it quietly, she replied. But then it would come again. Yes, he admitted. It will anyway. She turned to him. Then let it. He studied her face, the resolve etched there. They are already discussing you as if the outcome is settled. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Of course they are. They assume you will stay. She laughed softly without humor. Because no one walks away from power once it touches them. Would you? He asked. The question was too direct, too loaded. She did not answer immediately. Instead she asked, would you let me? His expression tightened. That isn't the same question. No, she said. It's the one that matters. That night, invitations arrived. Formal dinners, private gatherings, strategic alliances masked as social calls. She declined most. Tended one. It was enough. The man who sat beside her was everything the court favored. Polished, ambitious, unthreatening in the right ways. He spoke easily, laughed at appropriate moments, praised her intellect without challenging it. His interest was transparent. His admiration uncomplicated. She felt the Alpha King's attention from across the room like a live wire. Later, when the evening had thinned and the guests dispersed, he approached her. "You didn't discourage him," he said quietly. "I didn't encourage him," she replied. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're entitled to." His jaw tightened. "You're being courted." "I'm being observed," she corrected. "There's a difference." "And if you accept?" he asked. She held his gaze. "Then I choose." The words struck deeper than she intended. His silence stretched, heavy with implication. The pressure mounted quickly after that. Whispers grew louder. Assumptions hardened into plans. She was approached with offers that promised safety, permanence, elevation. A place beside him, unofficial for now but understood. She considered them all. Then she packed a bag. The decision came in the quiet hours before dawn, when the palace slept and her thoughts could no longer be outrun. She folded her clothes with care, each movement deliberate, grounding. She left a note on the desk, brief, precise. "I need space to think without expectation." She did not say goodbye. The Alpha King discovered her absence hours later. He read the note twice, then a third time, as if the meaning might change. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling. He ordered no pursuit, no announcement, only silence. Days passed. The court buzzed with speculation. He deflected questions with practiced ease, but inside something frayed. He missed her voice in council, her steadiness, the way she challenged him without fear. Across the city, Florence stayed in a modest house she'd once considered temporary. The familiar walls steadied her. Here she was not a symbol, not an outcome. She walked the markets, spoke with old acquaintances, listened more than she talked. The distance sharpened her clarity. She missed him. Not the crown, not the palace, the man who listened. On the fourth night a message arrived. No seal, no command. "I won't stop you. But know this, my door remains open. Not as a king's. It's mine." She stared at the words for a long time before folding the paper away. When she returned, it was on her terms. Not summoned, not escorted. She walked into the palace at midday, head high, heart steady. The Alpha King saw her from across the hall. Relief flashed through his eyes before he masked it. They met in the corridor where it had all begun. "You left," he said. "I needed to. And now?" She met his gaze. "Now you decide." He frowned. "I already did." "No," she said gently. "Decide if you want a partner or a possession." The world seemed to hold its breath. "I choose neither," he said slowly. "I choose to let you choose." She studied him, searching for deceit. Found none. "Then we continue," she said. "Carefully." He nodded once. "Carefully." As they parted, the watchers leaned in, eager for resolution. They would have to wait. Because some choices could not be rushed, and some bonds once tested only deepened in the waiting. Florence felt the difference the moment she stepped back into her role. It wasn't resistance. Far from it. The court adjusted around her like water around a stone, reshaping itself while pretending nothing had changed. But something had. Everyone sensed it. She was no longer being tested. She was being measured. Her first council meeting after her return was quieter than usual. Fewer interruptions. Fewer challenges disguised as questions. When she spoke, people listened. Not because she stood near the Alpha King, but because she had proven she could walk away from him and still return standing upright. That unnerved them. The Alpha King watched it all with careful attention. He spoke less than usual, letting the room reveal itself. Power, he'd learned, was most honest when it thought it wasn't being observed. After the meeting, Florence gathered her papers and stood. Instinctively, she looked toward him. Their eyes met. A silent question passed between them, private, unguarded. Later. He inclined his head just slightly. Later. They did not meet immediately. That was the unspoken agreement. Base respected. Choice honored. It made the air between them sharper, more charged, like tension pulled tight but not released. The court, of course, did not understand restraint. Invitations multiplied again, more aggressive this time. Private audiences. Strategic dinners. Carefully worded suggestions that she formalize her position. Anchor it, secure it, bind it to something permanent. Preferably someone. She declined with increasing bluntness. One afternoon, as she exited the archive wing, she found the Alpha King waiting in the corridor. No guards, no aides. Just him, leaning against the stone wall as if he'd been there long enough to forget he was waiting. "You're becoming difficult," he said mildly. She arched a brow. "I always was. They're growing impatient." "They should try patience," she replied. "It builds character." A corner of his mouth lifted. "You're provoking them. I'm surviving them." He straightened, studying her more seriously now. "You could make this easier." "For whom?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. "Then, for you." She shook her head. "That's the lie everyone tells when they want something from me." Silence stretched. The corridor was empty, but the palace had a way of listening regardless. "I won't pressure you," he said at last. "I know. But I won't protect you forever either." She met his gaze. "I don't want protection. I want fairness." His expression softened, not into gentleness but understanding. Those are rarely the same thing. That evening the pressure reached a breaking point. A formal proposal was delivered to her chambers, beautifully written, immaculately sealed. A union framed as partnership. Not marriage in name but in every function that mattered. Stability. Continuity. A promise to the court that uncertainty would end. She read it once. Then again. It would solve everything. And cost her herself. She folded the document carefully and placed it in the fire. Watched the flames consume the words until nothing legible remained. The knock on her door came not long after. She knew it was him before she opened it. The Alpha King stood there without ceremony. His expression tightly controlled. His gaze flicked briefly to the hearth, the lingering scent of smoke. "They told me you received it," he said. "And?" she asked. "And you burned it." "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "You could have refused quietly." "I already tried that," she said. "It didn't work. You've made enemies." "I had those already. Now they're just honest." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The room felt smaller with him in it. Not because of his size but because of the gravity he carried so effortlessly. "You're forcing a confrontation," he said. "No," she corrected softly. "I'm refusing to disappear." He looked at her then, not as a king assessing risk, but as a man confronting something he could not command. "What do you want?" he asked. The question landed heavily between them. Florence took a breath. "I want to matter without being owned. I want to stand beside you without vanishing into your shadow. I want choice that doesn't come with punishment. And if the world won't allow that, then the world will have to adjust." A bitter smile touched his lips. "You say that like it's easy." "I know it isn't," she replied. "That's why I'm still here." He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. The space between them felt deliberate, sacred. "I won't make you an offer tonight," he said quietly. "And I won't ask you for anything." She studied him, searching for hidden conditions. "For none." "Then why are you here?" she asked. "Because I needed you to know something." She waited. "If you walk away again," he said, voice low, steady, "I will let you go. But I will not pretend it doesn't cost me." The honesty of it stole her breath. I don't want to be your weakness, she said. You're not, he replied immediately. You're my risk. She laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief. That's not better. It's the truth. They stood there, close enough to feel each other's presence, restrained enough not to cross the line neither was ready to redraw. Outside, the palace lights burned late into the night. Inside, something fragile and fierce took shape. Not a promise, not a bond, but an understanding. The court would push harder now. She knew that. He did too. And when they did, lines would be tested. Not between them, but around them. Florence watched him turn to leave, then stopped him with a single word. Wait. He paused. When this breaks, she said quietly, it won't break cleanly. I know. Are you prepared for that? He looked back at her, eyes dark with resolve. I've been preparing my whole life. The door closed behind him. Florence stood alone in the quiet, heart steady, mind clear. Tomorrow the world would watch again. And next time, it wouldn't just be her standing in the balance. The morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight slicing through the grand windows of the palace, illuminating the stone floors and tapestries that lined the halls. Florence dressed slowly, meticulously, aware that today was not an ordinary day. Today, she was no longer just Florence of the lower city. She was a participant in something far larger, something that would shake the foundations of the kingdom. When she arrived in the antechamber leading to the great hall, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Servants hurried past, their eyes wide and murmurs hushed, but she noticed the subtle shifts in posture among the guards, the aides, the minor nobles. They were bracing themselves, anticipating a storm, and the storm was not hers, it was Aaron's. Aaron was already there, near the entrance to the hall, wearing the ceremonial robes that blended authority with quiet elegance. His dark mantle draped over his shoulders, crown perfectly centered. His hands folded behind his back as he observed the preparations. His gaze found hers almost immediately, steady and unwavering, and Florence felt her chest tighten under the weight of that simple connection. She stepped forward, and for a moment they were alone in the chaos. No courtiers, no elders, no whispers of expectation, just the two of them. "Ready?" he asked, voice low, almost private, yet carrying an unmistakable intensity. She nodded, unable to speak. Words felt insufficient. She was ready. The herald's voice rang through the hall, clear and commanding. "All rise. His Majesty, Alpha King Aaron, shall take his place upon the throne." The crowd obeyed, the murmur swelling into a subdued hum as Aaron ascended the steps to the dais. The elders seated themselves stiffly, faces a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and veiled defiance. The nobles in the elevated gallery whispered among themselves, each calculating the implications of what was about to unfold. Aaron's hand moved slightly, a subtle signal to Florence. She stepped into the hall, moving with calm certainty, letting her gaze sweep over the assembled crowd. Every pair of eyes seemed to fix on her, but she did not falter. She had rehearsed nothing. She had no lines. She had only the truth of herself. When she reached the center, Aaron extended his hand, palm open. She placed hers in his, and the touch sent a current through her that made the whispers fade into irrelevance. The space between them was neither small nor large. It was perfect, balanced, charged with every shared glance, every conversation in the library, every moment they had spent uncovering the corruption of the sacred flame. Aaron lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the knuckles, slow and deliberate. "Before the kingdom," he said, voice resonant and commanding, "I claim Florence, daughter of Gareth, as my mate. Not by tradition, not by manipulation, not by any false proclamation, but by choice, by truth, by what I know to be right." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some shocked, some scandalized, others enthralled. Florence felt the heat of their gaze, but all she could see was him. His eyes held hers, unwavering, an anchor in the sea of scrutiny. Evelyn, seated to the side, looked pale, her shoulders tight with tension. Florence caught the briefest flicker of fear and relief on her face. Fear for herself, relief that she would not be bound by deceit. Florence met her eyes and offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You are free," the gesture said, and Evelyn understood without words. Aaron straightened, his voice dropping lower, addressing those who questioned the validity of the claim. "All pairs proclaimed over the past 20 years shall have the choice to remain together or to part. No ceremony shall be manipulated again. No individual shall be forced into a bond against their will. And as for those who sought to exploit the sacred flame for their gain, justice shall be served." He paused, letting the weight of his decree settle. The room was silent, tension stretching like a drawn bowstring, ready to snap. Josephine's face was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The nobles who had conspired with her shifted uneasily. For once, fear replaced arrogance. Aaron's gaze returned to Florence. "And now," he said, voice softening but remaining deliberate, "I will claim what is mine by right of choice, by truth, and by the bond we have forged ourselves. Florence, do you accept this claim?" Tears pricked her eyes. She swallowed, lifting her chin, letting her voice carry across the hall. "Yes, I accept." The declaration echoed, louder than any whisper, clearer than any tradition. The crowd erupted, though Florence felt none of it directly. She felt only the hand in hers, warm, strong, steady. Aaron stepped closer, wrapping an arm around her waist, pulling her to him in a public embrace that was both possessive and protective. "You are mine," he murmured, not as a king to a subject, but as a man to the woman who had challenged and captivated him. Florence leaned against him, feeling the weight of every decision, every risk, every stolen moment in the library crystallize into this singular point. She was his, not because of fire, not because of ritual, not because of expectation, but because he had chosen her. The remainder of the day passed in a blur. Josephine and her allies were arrested, the witch summoned for trial, and the court descended into a mixture of shock, chaos, and reluctant acceptance. Florence remained by Aaron's side, absorbing the reality of what they had achieved together. The kingdom would take time to adjust, but the truth had been spoken, and that was enough. When night fell, Florence returned to her chambers, heart still racing. She barely had time to breathe before a knock sounded. She opened the door to find Aaron standing there. No crown, no mantle, only the man she had come to know intimately over nights of shared discovery. "May I come in?" he asked softly. She stepped aside. He entered, closing the door with deliberate care. They stood facing each other, the weight of the day settling between them. "I claimed you today," he said, voice low, almost private. "I know," she replied, voice trembling slightly. He stepped closer, eyes dark with something unspoken. Something is still missing. She understood immediately. The mark. The bond that transcended ritual, that would solidify what had begun. "You mean the marking," she whispered. He nodded. "If you allow it." Her heart leapt. She studied him. This man who had torn down centuries of manipulation, who had chosen her openly, fearlessly. She said simply, "Yes." He did not wait. Florence felt his lips claim hers with urgency, the world contracting to the heat and pressure between them. Hands explored, sought, claimed. The kiss was desperate, intense, a release of every held-back emotion, every stolen glance in the quiet library, every tension between duty and desire. Aaron lifted her, wrapping her legs around his waist, carrying her to the bed with a fluidity that betrayed strength and careful attention. The kiss did not falter, did not lessen. It grew, deepened, as his hands traced her body with reverence and longing. "Florence," he murmured, voice rough and broken with need. She responded with no hesitation, no doubt. I want you now. And he did not stop. The hours that followed were a symphony of closeness, of heat, of whispered names and urgent promises. Aaron marked her. The bite firm enough to signal claim but gentle enough to convey care. Florence felt it, the bond settling like molten fire in her veins. Mine, he murmured, voice low against her skin. You are mine, she replied, the words heavy with certainty. They held each other through the night, the palace silent, indifferent to the world outside. And for the first time, Florence did not feel lost or insignificant, or bound by the expectations of others. She was chosen not by chance, not by fire, not by manipulation, but by truth and by love. Aaron kissed her forehead, lips brushing her hair. Tomorrow, he whispered, drowsy but unyielding, we face the court again. The trials, the rest. It doesn't end here. I know, she murmured, letting herself be carried beneath the weight of his arm. His presence, his unwavering claim. But tonight, he said softly, you are only mine. I always was, she whispered. Wrapped in the Alpha King's arms, Florence finally slept fully, completely, without fear or hesitation. The world outside could wait. Tonight there was only them. The kingdom, the court, the legacy of deceit. All would be reckoned with in time. But in the quiet of that room, in the arms of the man who had fought for her and chosen her against every expectation, Florence had found something eternal. The power of choice, the certainty of love, and the bond that no manipulation could ever break. The dawn was heavy with tension, the pale light filtering through the tall, arched windows of the great hall like a judge's gaze. Word of Aaron and Florence's claim had spread throughout the kingdom overnight. Courtiers whispered nervously, servants hurried along the corridors, and the scent of anticipation hung thick in the air. Today was no longer about love alone. It was about justice, reckoning, and the very foundations of the Alpha King's rule. Florence, dressed in a gown of deep crimson, the color of both fire and defiance, her movements deliberate, her mind steady despite the racing pulse in her chest. She had slept wrapped in Aaron's arms, the bond between them now a living, breathing force beneath her skin, and though the exhaustion of last night tugged at her, her resolve was sharper than ever. Aaron was already in the hall when she arrived. Ceremonial robes replaced by battle-ready attire designed to signal both authority and strength. His gaze found hers instantly, dark and unwavering, and he inclined his head ever so slightly, a silent vow that he would face whatever came together. The council had convened early, an assembly of elders, judges, and minor nobles who had survived the initial chaos. Their faces were pale, a mixture of apprehension and anger, the whispers growing louder as Florence entered. The courtiers' hushed tones transformed into murmurs of outrage, disbelief, and cautious curiosity. They had expected compliance, ritual manipulation, but not this. Aaron raised his hand, and the room fell silent, the echo of his authority resonating through the chamber. This court, he began, voice steady and commanding, will convene not to judge love, but to judge treachery. Those who sought to manipulate the sacred flame, who plotted against our kingdom, will be held accountable. Justice will not be corrupted by fear or favor. The crowd shifted, tension palpable. Josephine, seated stiffly to one side, glared at Florence with venom barely restrained. The elders whispered among themselves, calculating their moves, questioning how this man dared to dismantle centuries of tradition. Florence stepped forward, standing beside Aaron. I stand here not as a pawn, not as a victim, but as a witness. I know the truth. I have seen the corruption, the lies, the manipulations that threatened our kingdom. And I will testify that the claim made yesterday was not a product of force, ritual, or deception, but of choice, of truth, and of love. Gasps echoed through the hall. Josephine's lips pressed into a thin line, her face pale with rage. Some nobles muttered under their breath, uncertain whether to support tradition or embrace the upheaval. Aaron's hand brushed against Florence's subtly. A silent affirmation. "Let it be recorded," he said, voice dropping so only the court could hear, "that the bond between Florence and myself is authentic, chosen freely, and binding not because of ritual, but because of the truth we have lived and proven." The elder in charge of records, a stern man with silver hair, nodded slowly. "So it shall be noted," he murmured, quill scratching against parchment. "The claim is valid under the law of choice, not manipulation. Let justice proceed accordingly." The council shifted again, preparing to confront the conspirators. Josephine rose abruptly, voice trembling with fury. "You cannot, this is blasphemy. You dare dismantle tradition. You dare insult the legacy of this court." Aaron stepped forward, towering and imposing, his presence magnetic and unyielding. "I dare because the people deserve truth, not manipulation. I dare because no one, not even a noble or elder, has the right to bind another against their will. And I dare because the kingdom deserves justice." The chamber erupted in debate, voices clashing, accusations flying. Florence remained calm, her gaze steady, sensing the delicate balance of authority and fear. She knew the tides could shift in an instant, and her presence there, unflinching, was as crucial as Aaron's strength. The trial proceeded, a careful dismantling of the conspiracy. Witnesses were called, confessions extracted, evidence presented. Every lie that Josephine had spun, every manipulation that had corrupted the sacred flame, was laid bare. The court could not ignore the overwhelming truth. The kingdom's foundation, shaken by centuries of ritual and secrecy, began to realign, solidifying around justice rather than fear. Finally, the verdict was delivered. Josephine and her allies were stripped of their titles, imprisoned, and made to answer fully for their crimes. The court, once steeped in manipulation, pledged reform. The sacred flame would no longer serve the ambitions of the few. It would honor choice, freedom, and truth. Florence and Aaron remained at the center, witnesses and symbols of change. The murmurs of astonishment had shifted to murmurs of respect, even admiration. Florence felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The kingdom was safer, purer, because of their courage and conviction. After the trial, the hall emptied gradually, leaving only Aaron and Florence. He took her hand, fingers intertwined, and smiled, dark eyes shining with pride. "We did it," he said softly. She rested her head against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat grounding her. "Yes, together," she whispered. Aaron tilted his chin up, capturing her lips in a kiss that was soft, victorious, and intimate, a promise that the trials of the day were only the beginning of their life together, not the end. Outside, the world carried on, unaware that a revolution of choice had quietly begun within the palace walls. But within that room, with the Alpha King's arms around her, Florence knew that they had changed the kingdom, and each other, forever. The morning light spilled into the great hall, glinting off polished stone and gilded embellishments, and Florence felt her heart hammer with anticipation. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day Aaron would publicly claim her, not through manipulation or ritual, but through truth, choice, and love. The anticipation in the corridors was palpable. Servants hurried past, whispering to one another, and courtiers lined the hallways, eager to witness history. Even the air seemed charged, as if the palace itself held its breath. Florence stood at the edge of the grand gallery, crimson gown sweeping the marble floor, each fold a statement of defiance and power. Her brown eyes scanned the hall below where the great gathering had assembled, nobles, commoners, elders, and guards alike. For the first time, she was not invisible, not a shadow among the elite. Today she was central. Today she mattered, not because of tradition, not because of law, but because of the bond she shared with Aaron. Aaron appeared at the top of the grand staircase, clad in his ceremonial robes. The crown atop his head seemed heavier today, not as a symbol of authority, but as a mantle of responsibility. Every movement was deliberate, measured, commanding respect, yet the tension in his shoulders betrayed the personal stakes beneath his regal exterior. When his eyes met hers, Florence felt the rush of reassurance and desire all at once, a tether to reality amid the storm of courtly eyes and whispered speculations. The herald climbed the raised platform, quill in hand, ready to announce the traditional claiming ceremony. "We are gathered to witness the proclamation of His Majesty, Alpha King Aaron, as he claims his sacred mate," the herald bellowed, voice echoing against the vaulted ceilings. Polite applause followed as expected, and Florence's gaze fell to Lady Evelyn, standing stiffly beside her mother, Josephine, both faces pale with tension. Aaron descended the staircase with deliberate authority. Each step exuded power and certainty, and Florence felt herself drawn forward despite the throng of onlookers. As he reached the center, he raised a hand, and the murmurs fell into silence, all attention focusing on the king. He spoke, voice steady, resonant, filled with undeniable authority. "Before any ceremony is performed today, there is truth that must be acknowledged. For years, the sacred flame ceremony has been corrupted, manipulated by those seeking power. I am here to rectify that wrong." The crowd stirred, some whispering nervously, others gasping in astonishment. Josephine's lips pressed into a thin, angry line, while Evelyn's shoulders stiffened, uncertainty flickering across her features. Aaron's gaze swept the hall with unwavering intensity, stopping briefly to find Florence at the edge of the gallery. Her heart surged. His eyes, dark and commanding, held hers with an unspoken promise. Courage and choice together. "I present evidence," Aaron continued, motioning to the table that the guards brought forward. Ancient letters, books, and records lay exposed, each document a testament to the treachery and deceit that had plagued the kingdom. For 20 years, noble families have manipulated who is proclaimed a mate, binding individuals not by choice or heart, but by convenience and ambition. These acts have destroyed lives. Today, the truth is revealed. His voice grew heavier, sharper, carrying the weight of his fury and righteous indignation. The elders attempted to intervene, murmuring protests, but Aaron raised his voice to silence them. "The evidence is indisputable. Letters between Lady Josephine and other conspirators, records of payments to Melisandre, the witch who conducted the manipulated rituals, and confessions of those who allowed these practices, all confirm the corruption. Justice demands accountability." His eyes flickered momentarily to Florence, and in that instant, her breath caught. She felt the gravity of this moment, not only for the kingdom but for their bond. Josephine's face contorted with rage. "You cannot, this is blasphemy. The ceremony is sacred. You have no authority," she began, only for Aaron to step forward, his presence monumental and unwavering. "I have authority as the king," he interrupted, voice low, resonant, and uncompromising. "I have authority as one wronged by lies, as one who bears the duty of truth. This sacred tradition will serve the people, not the ambitions of the corrupt." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the hall. Florence noticed nobles shifting uneasily, weighing allegiance against tradition. Evelyn's expression softened as realization dawned. She had been a pawn, not an accomplice. Relief, tempered by lingering uncertainty, swept across her features. Aaron turned fully to Evelyn, voice gentle, compassionate, yet firm. "You bear no blame, Lady Evelyn. You were misled. The claim made upon you is revoked. You are free." Evelyn's shoulders slumped as tension drained from her body. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she whispered, bowing her head. With the conspirators exposed and the wrongs laid bare, Aaron raised his hand to call the hall to silence once more. "Henceforth, the sacred flame ceremony is suspended. No proclamation shall be made until the process is restored to its intended purpose, without manipulation, without deceit, and with the choice of the heart respected. Every individual proclaimed a mate in the last 20 years shall have the opportunity to affirm or dissolve their bond. The hall erupted with murmurs, a mixture of astonishment, excitement, and relief. Florence's chest swelled with pride and awe. She had witnessed history, not as a bystander but as an active participant and, more importantly, as someone who had been chosen by truth, not manipulation. Aaron's eyes found Florence again, piercing, unwavering, and filled with warmth and desire. "And now," he said, voice dropping to a hush, "it is my turn to choose. Not by ritual, not by manipulation, but by my heart, by the truth I know." His gaze swept across the hall and landed firmly on Florence. Florence stepped forward. Her legs trembled, the marble floor suddenly heavy beneath her feet. Courtiers' eyes followed her every movement, but all she could see was Aaron. His hand extended toward her, an invitation not only to the center of the hall but into a life of choice, love, and freedom. She swallowed hard, heart racing, and crossed the distance to him, her hand brushing his as he captured it gently, firmly, with unyielding intent. Aaron's voice echoed through the hall, resonant, clear, and final. "Before this court, before the people of this kingdom, I claim Florence, daughter of Gareth, as my mate. Not because tradition demands it, not because of manipulation, but because I choose her. Because she is mine." Silence fell first, heavy and absolute, before the hall erupted with shock, awe, and eventually applause. Some nobles' faces were pale with disbelief, others with reluctant respect, while commoners murmured excitedly among themselves. Josephine's eyes widened in fury and helplessness as the crowd turned against her. Florence's chest ached with emotion as tears pricked her eyes. She lifted her voice, trembling but unwavering, and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "I accept. I choose him." Aaron's hand tightened around hers, and he bent slightly to kiss her fingers gently, a gesture of ownership and tenderness all at once. The crowd's murmur swelled into applause, some skeptical, some jubilant, but Florence heard none of it. All she felt was Aaron, all she saw was him, and for the first time she truly belonged. After the formalities, Josephine and her conspirators were taken into custody. Melisandre was summoned to stand trial, and the kingdom braced for the reforms that Aaron had promised. Yet for Florence and Aaron, the trials were over. Today the claim was official. Today the bond was recognized, unshaken by lies or tradition, sealed not by ritual but by the truth of their hearts. As the hall emptied, Florence felt Aaron's hand at her waist, guiding her gently. "We've rewritten history," he murmured against her ear, voice low and intimate. "Not just for us, but for everyone." She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "And tomorrow," she whispered, "we live it." Aaron leaned down, brushing his lips against the top of her head. "Tomorrow we begin." Together, standing in the grand hall now empty of chaos, they allowed themselves a moment of quiet, a pause in the storm before facing the future. The kingdom had been shaken, traditions rewritten, and lives altered, but they had each other, a bond forged in truth and strengthened by choice. That night, the palace was silent, the corridors empty. Yet in the quiet, Florence could feel Aaron's warmth at her side, the connection between them alive and undeniable. For the first time in her life, she was not just surviving, not just living in the shadows. She was claimed, chosen, and loved. In the privacy of their chambers, they would mark that bond fully, solidifying it beyond ceremony, beyond politics. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of victory, they allowed themselves to simply be. Florence's hand in Aaron's, his gaze never leaving her face. She felt the enormity of what had been accomplished. The kingdom had been freed from deceit. She had been claimed by truth. And the man beside her, the Alpha King, was entirely, completely hers. They remained there, breathless, hearts aligned, the world outside their doors irrelevant. For Florence, the low district wolf, the girl who had belonged nowhere, had finally found her place. Not in a title or a ritual, but in the arms of the man who had chosen her. Truly, completely, irrevocably. The dawn arrived slowly over the palace, brushing gold and rose across the marble towers. Florence awoke before the sun, the memory of the claiming ceremony still vivid in her mind. She felt the weight of it, the victory, the liberation, the bond that had been forged not through tradition, manipulation, or expectation, but through truth and mutual choice. Her hand rested over her heart, feeling the steady beat that echoed the life she now shared with Aaron. The palace was quiet, serene, almost reverent in its stillness. Aaron lay beside her, a protective warmth radiating through the linens, his chest rising and falling with the assurance of life and presence. She watched him for a moment, taking in the sharp line of his jaw, the brush of chestnut hair across his forehead, and the slow, even rhythm of his breathing. He was formidable, yes, but vulnerable in the intimacy of this morning, the weight of kingship temporarily lifted to reveal the man beneath the crown. She reached for him, brushing her fingers across his bare shoulder. Aaron stirred, his dark eyes opening slowly, softening when they met hers. "Morning," he murmured, voice husky with sleep and contentment. "Morning," Florence replied, her lips curving into a smile that reached her eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not well," he admitted, voice low, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Too much on my mind. But now that you are here, it is easier." She leaned into him, pressing her forehead to his chest, feeling the warmth and power radiating from him. "We did it," she whispered. "All of it. The truth, the claim, the kingdom, and us." Aaron's hand came up to cradle her head, thumb brushing along her temple in a tender, unspoken vow. "Yes," he murmured. "And yet, this is only the beginning. The walls of the palace may have been shaken, traditions rewritten, but the kingdom is still alive. And we have each other to guide it." The day moved slowly at first, as if granting them a pause before the responsibilities of rule resumed. Courtiers approached with gentle deference, not only acknowledging Aaron as king but recognizing Florence as the woman he had chosen. Each interaction reminded her that the bond they shared was no longer private. It was a symbol of hope, change, and truth to the entire realm. By mid-morning, the newly reformed council gathered. Aaron presided with Florence at his side, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the council table, her gaze steady and unwavering. The reforms they had promised, the dissolution of corrupted claims, the fair recognition of mates, the transparency in royal decisions, were on the agenda. Florence spoke when called upon, her voice clear, intelligent, and commanding respect. Every word she offered was measured, heartfelt, and unafraid. Aaron watched her from across the table, pride evident in every line of his posture, every glance shared. As the council meeting adjourned, Florence finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She stepped into the sunlit courtyard, letting the warmth wash over her, and for the first time in years she felt completely free. Aaron approached silently, a shadow that moved with certainty beside her. He took her hand, fingers intertwining with hers, thumb brushing over her knuckles in the familiar rhythm of connection. "You are extraordinary," he said softly, voice carrying over the quiet of the morning. "Not just to me but to this kingdom. The way you carry yourself, the way you speak truth, it will change the realm for the better." Florence felt a blush warm her cheeks. "I could not have done any of it without you," she whispered. "Without your courage, your willingness to defy the old ways, your belief in me." Aaron's expression softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through the Alpha King's usual dominance. "No," he countered, lifting her chin gently. "You believed in yourself. I merely followed where your courage led. And I will continue to follow Florence wherever life takes us. For a long moment they stood in the quiet courtyard, the world reduced to the space between them. Then Aaron pulled her into an embrace, slow and deliberate. His strength enveloping her without suffocating. His warmth a protective mantle. Florence rested her head against his chest, the steady beat beneath her ear matching her own. "Tonight," he murmured, voice low and intimate, "we celebrate. Not as king and mate alone, but as two people who have chosen each other freely, completely." Florence's lips curved against his chest, a soft smile, a quiet laugh escaping her. "Then let us celebrate as ourselves," she said. "No ceremony, no witnesses. Just us." The sun sank behind the palace towers, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. That evening, the chambers that had once felt formal and distant now seemed warm, alive with the presence of shared intimacy and freedom. Aaron lit the hearth, its flames flickering across the high ceilings and golden drapes. Florence sat near the fire, a soft shawl draped across her shoulders, and Aaron approached her slowly, a quiet reverence in his every step. He knelt before her, brushing his fingers across her cheek. "This is ours," he said. "All of it. Our bond, our future, everything between us. And I vow to protect it, to honor it, to nurture it, for as long as I live." Florence's eyes glistened. "I vow the same," she whispered, her hand rising to touch his cheek. "I will be yours, not because tradition or law demands it, but because my heart chooses you. Always." Aaron leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that was tender, deliberate, and consuming all at once. It was a seal, not of ceremony, but of truth and love, a testament to a bond forged in the fires of struggle and choice. Florence responded, her hands threading through his hair, pulling him closer, feeling the weight of his body, the warmth of his heart, and the undeniable certainty that this was home. Hours passed as they remained entwined, exploring the intimacy of trust, desire, and connection that had been absent in her life for too long. They spoke softly between kisses, sharing confessions, dreams, and unspoken promises. Every touch, every glance, every whispered word reinforced the bond that was uniquely theirs. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Florence lay curled against Aaron's chest, their breaths synchronized, hearts aligned. The palace outside had returned to routine, guards patrolled, and life within the kingdom resumed. Yet within these chambers, time had slowed, offering a moment of eternity. Aaron brushed a strand of hair from her face, lips hovering near her temple. "No matter what comes," he murmured, "we face it together. No tradition, no conspiracy, no crown. Only us." Florence smiled, eyes heavy with sleep but bright with certainty. "Only us," she echoed, letting the weight of the words settle deep into her heart. And in that quiet morning, as the world awoke around them, they allowed themselves to simply be. Lovers, equals, partners in a bond beyond crown or kingdom. Florence, once a girl hidden in shadows, now fully realized, and Aaron, the alpha king whose strength was tempered by love, found solace and completeness in each other. Outside, the kingdom stirred, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place in the chambers of the palace. But inside, love had triumphed, truth had claimed its place, and two hearts beat together as one. No ceremony could ever match the depth of their bond. No crown could impose what their hearts had chosen freely. Florence and Aaron had rewritten destiny, not for the world but for themselves. And that choice, that freedom, that love was theirs alone. They rose together, stepping into the day as partners, as lovers, as equals. The palace, the kingdom, and history itself had witnessed their courage, but the real triumph was personal. The choice, the truth, and the bond that would endure beyond all else. Together they faced the future, undaunted, unshaken, and inseparable.